Well, everyday Australians should be involved in deciding the timing and model of a future referendum on the country becoming a republic. That's all according to the Australian Republic movement, of course. It's driving national conversations about how the lucky country could eventually split from the monarchy. Joining me is Australian Republic Movement National Director and CEO, Isaac Jeffrey. Isaac, thank you for your time today. I mean, the debate has somewhat been put to the back burner since the last referendum, but nevertheless, it's still there in people's minds. How would a republic in Australia look? Where do you even begin with this process?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. And I think Australians are ready to have the conversation. We're looking at very high levels of support for people who are very keen to have an Australian republic. And while I understand that we've just had a fairly bruising and fairly brutal referendum campaign in The Voice, now's the time to start the conversation on what a future republic referendum would look like. We're not talking about this year. We're not even talking about next year. We're probably talking about a couple of years away from now. But it's worth having the conversation. We're starting the conversation and getting the Australian people involved. And that's what we're going to be doing in 2024. This year, we're going to be going around the country asking Australians what they think about an Australian republic, what they think the head of state should be called, how long they should serve for, how many fixed terms they might be able to have, if it's a fixed term at all. We're going to really start that conversation with the Australian people because, after all, it's for the Australian people that we're doing this. It's not for ARM, it's not for the government, it's not even for the parliament, it's for the Australian people. So they need to be the ones that take control of this and help shape it.
What kind of model would you put forward here? And exactly, I guess, the process behind deciding who the head of state is, as you mentioned there, how long they stay in term for? Does it impact Australia's from a defence perspective? Does it impact us economically? There are so many moving parts to consider here and also convince Australians.
Yeah, there certainly are. And what we're saying is that we've got a draft model, but we want to take that to the Australian people, to take what we've already created and then build upon it and let the Australian people take ownership of it. So the first and primary thing that will change is that we'll have an Australian rather than a British monarch as our head of state. They'll be elected by the Australian people. Most likely, we're putting forward that it'd probably be a 5-year fixed term with a maximum of 2 terms that they'd be able to serve. One of the ideas that we're putting out there is that the federal parliaments, and each of the state and territory parliaments would be able to put forward a candidate or a number of candidates who would then go onto a shortlist, and that's who the Australian people would vote on, is that shortlist. But what we're really keen to do is test these ideas with the Australian people. You mentioned defence. Nothing would change in the defence. From a defence point of view, we would still be part of AUKUS. We would still be part of the military alliances that we have with the US. None of that would change. We also wouldn't be leaving the Commonwealth. It's not likely anyway we would leave the Commonwealth because we'd just be one of 41 other countries in the Commonwealth who are republics. There are only 15 left in the Commonwealth who have Charles as their head of state. So nothing would change in those terms. And the same goes for economics. What we would get from an economic perspective is we would have a champion as head of state, an equal who could go around, sit at these tables with other heads of state as an equal, as Charles does for the British now. On his recent tours in France and Germany, that's exactly what he did. He took British industry, he took British industry leaders with him to promote Britain. Who's doing that for Australia? Sure, the Prime Minister and others are there to help out, but we need someone that can walk into those rooms as an equal and finally have Australia, out of the shadow of Britain and not as the little sibling anymore, but standing on its own 2 feet.
Isaac, we do have to wrap things up, but what do you say to the fierce critics here? I've personally got friends who are very loyal monarchists and they don't want to see Australia become a republic. But then on the other side of it, the scale, you've also got people saying, look, we're in a cost of living crisis. We've got other more important things to worry about at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree that cost of living needs to be the focus of any government, in particular this government, given where we're at the moment with cost of living. It's absolutely a priority. And that's why we're saying we're not expecting a vote this year. We're not even expecting it next year. But in a few years, let's have this conversation. Let's have the debate. As for the cost of running a republic referendum, similar to the voice, it'll be a similar cost. And yes, it is expensive. Yes, it is a hefty price tag, but that's democracy. If we want the people to be able to have a say, then we need to be able to ask them.
Okay.
I'm sure that the AEC and others could look at some ways of getting that price down, but what's really important is that the Australian people get to have their say, and there's only two ways they can do that: elections and referenda. So they're really important.
Okay, Isaac Jeffrey, thank you. Important conversation.